Hello, and welcome to our session today on music. Specifically, we're looking at the Romantic era of music. We're in the middle of the 18th century, and today we're looking at opera. And this week is about opera and music theater. Today we'll be just looking at really briefly a little bit of opera. It's kind of a mixed bag, really. It's Italian opera, and then it's also it actually ends not in Italian opera, but with share sound with gosh, Italian opera sung in, I believe, French, written for an American, an English audience. There you go. All right. Romantic opera and musical theater in the mid-century, they call it. So thinking about that time period, where we come out of the French Revolution, just prior to this, the late 1700s, the Napoleonic Wars in the early 1800s, that set up this whole idea of new countries. Really, they were Russia and France were kind of countries before the wars, but they weren't recognized as countries until the French Revolution brought them all together. Kind of a sense of unity out of that. Same time frame. There's stuff is going on in Russia that we haven't really talked about, but that's beside the point. So then Germany is one of those places where it's still kind of different groups of Germans. For example, Huguenots, and one of Rossini's early operas is the Huguenots. No, Meyerbeer wrote the Huguenots. We're going to go back for just a second. And Italy, also different places. You remember from the 1400s, the Medici's in Florence, and then Ravenna is a different pocket, Rome is a different pocket, different regions. And so in the early to mid 1800s, we're seeing this move called nationalism, where countries are starting to kind of form an identity around certain characteristics. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense that music would be one of those things that draws people together around the language. And it's something I haven't really talked about, but we see that, and I probably won't mention it again unless it just occurs to me, is that as we listen to operas, as we sing our songs, it's interesting how the different composers use the stuff of the language to make their songs work. We sing pretty much everything in English, or if our native tongue is Spanish, or whatever our native, our I guess that's still called a native tongue. I don't know, mother language. I don't know if that's even appropriate now. But whatever our first language is, when we sing in that, we have, characteristics. So when we think of Italian has these big open vowels, a, e, o, u, and the language is really about all that space in there. Whereas German has a lot of consonants, and it sounds kind of inside the mouth, and so you think of let's use counting in Spanish: uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, seis, siete, ocho, nueve, diez. In French, un, deux, trois, quatre, cinq, six, sept, huit. Horrible at French. German, ein, zwei, drei, Horsen, Gaggle. Ein, zwei, drei, vier, fünf, and that's as far as I get. but it's more about those vowels. And English, we have, you know, our own vowels instead of simple. Anyway, nationalism is a move not just in music, in art and politics, in all areas of life. We see national. Incidentally, this is working alongside the idea of the Industrial Revolution that's going on, and the move of people from being an agrarian, agricultural-based society to an industry-based society. People moving from the country, from the rural areas into the cities. And in one of my other classes, we talk at this point about how for the first time we have a city like Paris, London, New York. There's one other one that comes to mind that is in there. These cities now have 1 million people in them. And, you know, that's not too much to us. I mean, New York has 7 or 8 million in it, and maybe 9 or 10 now. Mexico City, we've been down there a few times, anywhere from 37 to 42 million people. Oklahoma City area. Oklahoma City proper has a little over 500,000 people. That's just what is the Oklahoma City boundaries. But this metro area, including Oklahoma City, Bethany, Mustang, Norman, Moore, East, whatever's over in Mendel area. In the metro area, Oklahoma City has over 1 million people. And we're not a big city. We have a big landmass. But in the 1800s, that's unheard of. Trains are starting to come into being, and the transportation systems are ramping up. So all kinds of changes going on. And opera is smack dab in the middle of that, run for profit, upper class and the elites attend, oftentimes not so much for the music as for the appearance, or, you know, they get status by being there. And as evidenced in this poster, the singers kind of drive what's going on in the opera. So you've got your piece of paper out, or you're getting ready to type your email, and let's do this for our first question. I'm going to jot this down too. Question 1. Who in the early 1800s up to about 1830, 1840, who is driving opera performances? Who is driving performances of operas? And that's going to be, the answer is going to be the singers, because the people are coming to hear that performance in the early 1800s. In fact, on this poster that I cannot really help you out with, because it's in French, toutes les entrées de faveur sont suspendues. I'm horrible at that. But somewhere in here are listed the singer, but you don't even see the composer's name. This starts to change in the mid 1800s, and composers start to get their due credit. And so we're going to look at one of those. Okay, so because it was the singers and the companies that were really more driving opera, they picked and choose what they wanted to sing out of the opera. They changed parts of it. There were no, copyright laws at this time, and so no copyright laws, and so they didn't, the composers didn't make much money off of them. They didn't have any recourse as far as if somebody was changing things or combining things or whatever they did to them. Just nothing that they could do about that. but they did have, strong characters, all kinds of different distant lands, long ago times. And you think of the topics that we've talked about in previous operas, the Greek mythology and some of the things that were going on. That makes perfect sense. With the nationalism, with the revolutionary stuff, this idea of the languages and the development of a group identity, the operas started to grab onto that idea as well. And so, like German's Weber's Der Freischütz was really something that inspired them to be building their nations. And of course, Wagner comes along and gives us this whole German operatic thing for a later session. It was opera. Opera came out of Italy, so they had more opera houses than anybody else, and different composers even were starting to build their own opera houses. Every town, I was looking at Google because I remember that there were some places here in Oklahoma in the early 1900s where there were opera houses built. Down in Shawnee, where my wife grew up, there was an opera house that is still there. It's not an opera house anymore. They don't do operas there, but there you go. All right. So Rossini, 1792 to 1868, was in school, music school, conservatory by 1806, and wrote his first opera at 18. He was 18. I don't do the math there, but there he is, Mr. Rossini. Wrote several operas. 1810 is first opera commission, so 1792 to 1890, maybe 18, yeah. Several different works there. 39 operas by Mr. Rossini. The Barber of Seville is one of his more popular ones. He wrote comic operas, and he wrote opera seria, opera comique and opera seria, which is comic operas and serious operas. And the comic operas were like a sitcom today, as opposed to, well, okay, so I don't know what, so I would watch Friends, or Frasier as a sitcom, as a comic opera, and then Colonel Mines or NCIS as an opera seria, serious opera, not serial. That's Criminal Minds is serial. Othello, looking back at the Greek thing, the Stabat Mater was one of his major works. That is a religious work. The Petit Messe Solennel is also a religious work. It's a small mass. Other smaller vocal and instrumental pieces. Wrote a lot of stuff. One of my favorites, we may talk about in a little while, not today. The Pines of Rome. We will mention that briefly today. Best known for his comic operas, and for blending the idea of the comic opera and the serious opera, to create a broader spread of interest, so that he could play with your emotions more. Really, I mean, it's the Romantic era, so they're playing with our emotions. This bel canto singing style that he does, this elegant, effortless kind of singing, the agility and flexibility, florid embellishment, which means a lot of trills or runs that go like that or whatever, and then a lot of improvised, building on what happened in the late classic era with Handel and Mozart and those guys, where in the late classic era, the singers would sing a line and then repeat the line, putting in their own little twist to it. And for Rossini, a lot of that kind of same thing, where they're seeing embellishment. Also, pretty snappy tunes. Maybe not. Pretty snappy tunes. Also, bel canto singing, this idea of the Rossini crescendo. A phrase repeated a little bit louder, repeated a little bit louder, even sometimes going up in pitch, which makes it happen louder, or crescendo effect. Today we might call it terraced dynamics, where you have it this level, and then you pop up a level to this level, and you pop up a level to this level. And then every story, every scene is structured so that it changes throughout. One of the things that he brought into opera is that, remember previously, the opera was advanced, the action was advanced by the recitative. And in the aria, looked back on that recitative and kind of just everything kind of stopped while they had the aria. Well, Rossini made the aria move the story along. So he's starting to incorporate this idea that the aria can actually take us, things can happen in an aria. Isn't that incredible? So he does that. And we're not going to dig too deeply in this. I want to get on to some music that we can listen to. But we're going to watch just a little bit of The Barber of Seville. He does this thing called an aria in two sections, with a cantabile and a cabaletta. And the cantabile is kind of a sing, cantar, canta, cante, to sing. It is a happy-ish kind of melodic sort of thing. And then the cabaletta is a little more dark, maybe a little bit angry, can be repeated. And then, oh, excuse me. Oh, here I am. I need to keep moving because you have a lot to do. Una voce poco fa. And it's the entrance of Cavatina. It's coming in, and it just has some really fun stuff here. He actually married this girl, and did they give her a name? And I don't remember it. Married and wrote music for her. Oh, shades of Mozart. And she was a great singer. He was a great composer. Mi fo guida. This is what I mean when I see a florid, Florid, florid stuff. And so we have this, it's ornamented. This is the original, what he would have written. Mi fo guida, with this little crescendo, in part by that, and then moving on in essento troppo le prima de G, and then rather than doing the neighboring tones, the soprano might do just a thing down and then come up to here with little grace notes, bleep, 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 and then another drop down, and then more of this stuff. You just see all kinds of freedom for the singer to do what he or she feels to do within the context of the song, of course, not changing things, but there. And this is a little bit more difficult to read. No, that didn't make it any bigger. The other thing that he did was that he opera is starting to shift where the instruments are the main thing. I had mentioned earlier that the singers were the important part, and the composers in the middle of the century came forward. So this might be the second thing we write down. In early 1800s, actually, this is the second thing to write down, and I'll tell you more specifically. In the early 1800s, all of opera was about the singer. And so the orchestra was really just an accompaniment to the singer. You might recall listening to the recitatives that were just a continuo, cello, bass, keyboard, harpsichord usually, and a vocalist. And the vocals really drove the line. Well, and this is what we're seeing, and this is what I want you to write down. One of those transitions, one of those shifts is that the orchestral instruments start to come into prominence and have a role to play in terms of bringing out emotion and making action happen. It's part of the instruments. However you want to word that. Let me write that down. Shift is from singers to instruments also. Could even just write that. Shift is from singers to singers and instruments, or instruments also. But having said that, you see that the strings here just go little pizzicato, little pizzicato, little pizzicato. There's really not a lot going on with the orchestra. It's adding to what the singer is doing, but it's allowing the singer the freedom to be who that singer needs to be without getting in the way. Even down here, even though there's a lot of notes going on there, it's just basically a arpeggiated chord. Very sparse, very light. So that's one of those characteristics. Here we go. You can see the strings doing the pizzicato, which is the gentle plucking of the string, at a soft dynamic. And it's the basses and in the other three parts, basses, violas, violins, basses, violas, violins, allowing for the vocalist to sing. Now, this is the entrance of this lady, Catalina. Una voce poco fa, and there's a little bit of action going on, so just watch for a minute. Isn't that great staging? The cavaletta section. Now, before we go on, I would just want to say, you notice that she's singing, and she's putting all that drama in her face and in her actions. And if you were sitting in the audience, you would feel that she's really just telling you a story, but she's not really just looking at you. She's just kind of telling a story. And as you prepare for recitals, as you prepare your own pieces, one of those things that you want to be thinking about is, what is the story that I'm telling? And how am I telling that? You're not just standing up there singing to us a song. I can't think of a song that is just a song. Most of the songs that we sing, just about all of them, are stories, even if they're instrumental in nature. They're stories that we're telling. So how are we using our expression and our bodies to tell that story? We're going to get a bit, I mentioned the cabaletta earlier. I think this is really the cabaletta section, and that always a cantible. Here we go. No. I was wrong. This is actually moving the next part. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's go in here. Yeah, there we go. All right, so he moved after a while. I don't remember the incidents, thing that happened that did this, but he moved to Northern Europe, English and France area, wrote Guillaume Tell for the Paris Opera. Tons and tons of performances during his lifetime. This was like when he was 30 or 35, 40 years old. He was a young guy, really, when he wrote it. Very popular, made lots of money off of that. Timely, this theme of rebellion in the story. William Tell was a person involved in the conflict that we talk about in other classes of the Protestant and Catholics, and all the intrigue going on there. So this was subject to censorship and subject to being never mind. But it's got some really great stuff in it. And one of those great pieces is the overture. Now, the overture we've talked about in the past is that first song that sets it up. Sets up the rest of the opera. So when I click on this in just a minute, well, I'll do that in just a minute. Anything else in here? William Tell, 1829, written in 1820. Oh, that's right. This is cool. He wrote William Tell, the last opera he ever wrote. He's like 35, 1829, 1792, 1802, 1812, 1822. It was 35 or so when he wrote it, and it got put out. The dude retired. He lived up at 1868, almost 30 more years. And he had parties every Saturday night. He had other stuff went on in his life. Read about it yourself. But his works became so popular, and he was one of those first that, again, that was recognized as a composer of opera, and the operas were recognized as his, as opposed to being those of the singer. Okay, so this is William Tell by Rossini, and we're going to just listen to a bit of the opera. I mean, the overture of the opera. And here's why. I'm going to get this going here. And you see right off the bat, this whole puppy is like 5 hours long. Operas are not for the faint of heart. Okay, I'm going to turn it up. Now, the final question I'm going to ask you is, what is the TV show that uses this theme? I'll tell you when the theme comes. Hope you can hear that. I'm gonna turn it up in your instrument. This is that terrorist dynamics where the Rossini Christian, Rossini Dickerson. Two quick stories as we quieten back down for a minute. When my kids were little, we used to play this when we'd build a fire in the fireplace and have in their sleeping bags, and we'd pretend that for that first 5 minutes like they're taking naps. You know, kids don't really take naps very often once they get to be a certain age. And then we'd pretend like that was a storm, and they kind of wake up and then they get through the storm and they go back. And we're going to get to a violin, flute part right here. And in the Pines of Rome, a piece that we'll listen to later, the flute is used to play verb calls. And that reminded me of that just a little bit. So here we are with my kids around the fireplace. Oh, nice and peaceful. It was quiet. Second story is this. When my wife was in college, her roommate relied on her to wake her up every day. And so sometimes my wife would put on this piece and she would live. She says, when her roommate said, "This is not waking me up." Oh my. And it doesn't really. Kind of pastoral. Some of those memorable melodies. Flute, using all that florid stuff. My kids sleeping by the fire, sleeping. Becky's roommate. Knowing she's got class to get to. familiar? In the background, it's William Tell Overture. That's one of the great orchestral pieces that would be played in a symphony concert. If you go down to the Oklahoma City Symphony, that's usually played once every 3 or 4 years by the symphony, just because it's a fun piece and people recognize it. What they recognize is that theme that you're going to write down. Did you recognize it? You know what TV show that's from? Probably not. It was a TV show when I was a kid. It was The Lone Ranger. That was from the opening of The Lone Ranger. So there are other Italian composers. Bellini is one. Donizetti is another. We're not going to touch on anymore. So in fact, we're going to conclude it right there today and pick it up later with some French opera. Let's see. We might have a German opera here. Yeah, a little bit. Touch on the United States a little bit. We'll finish with Rossini. Here you go. Yeah. Oh, stop. Oh, bravo. Okay, so that's Rossini's overture. And that's really that's just the beginning of the opera. I mean, the people haven't even come on stage yet. That's the overture. It's the first thing that happens. We got a whole 4.5 hours left to go. Great stuff, great opera, great fun. See you next time.